Howdy, folks. You're back for another week of Follow the Leader. I'm your host, Lee, and I am here with Pastor Rob. Pastor Rob, welcome.
Thank you. So nice to finally meet you sort of in person.
Right, the best we can do in the
Yes.
circumstances. Folks, Pastor Rob is the pastor of a Edmonds Presbyterian Church in Washington State. He is a Presbyterian Church, United States of America ordained pastor and has spent quite a number of years on the West Coast, correct?
Yes.
From California, and now you're up in Washington.
Right. Basically my whole life. With a few other yes.
I love the West Coast. So beautiful. You're from Orange County, and you were raised in the Evangelical
No,
Presbyterian
in the
Church.
PCUSA at that time.
You were
Evangelical Presbyterian Church didn't exist yet. So,
okay,
but yeah.
right. That's in the split in the '70s,
Yes. Well, actually, it was the
where
United
things.
Presbyterian Church when I was a kid, and then in 1983, that's when the Southern denomination, which was the PCUS, united with the United Presbyterian Church and became the PCUSA in 1983. And then, you have those little divisions, like the PCA. A lot of people know the PCA. PCA actually split out in the 70s from the PCUS in the South. And so they're the Southern Church, a lot more than people realize. So,
Yes. Well, and that's something I think about too. So I am from the Disciples of Christ
uh
denomination. Um, One of the things that when you said that you were raised in the '70s out in California, it made me think of Jim Jones.
yeah, yes.
And then it started, and then Jimmy Carter and Ronald
Right.
Reagan, and I was like, wow, that was an era of real cult followings
Oh,
there.
yeah. All the crazy stuff.
What?
Yeah, and I grew up sort of in the middle. I was a teenager in the late 70s and mid late 70s, and I didn't realize how much history I was seeing. And one of the people I met, I think it was in 1975 or so, six, maybe 76, when I was a young teenager, was Francis Schaeffer. I don't know if you know that name, but he was like,
I've heard.
yeah, he was he was on a book tour, and he was sort of the intellectual heart of the moral majority, and that whole sort of the beginnings of the Christian nationalist movement back then. And of course, and I was a young guy, so I didn't really know who he was, but he was very kind and everything, and very intellectual. But then came to later know that no, he wasn't so good. He didn't really,
Right.
he was part of that whole Jerry Falwell, Paul Weyrich, James Dobson, all of those guys. So, yeah. So I didn't realize at the time that I really was, yeah, seeing history being made at that time.
And that 1976 was the year of the evangelical. I think that was Time
Hmm.
magazine dubbed it that. The '70s was Jimmy Carter, who was a
Yeah.
Southern Baptist, but not in the same Southern Baptist that we think
No.
of today. You've watched a bit of that evolution as well.
Yeah, and in fact,
The
I remember that Carter, for a lot of people, especially like on the West Coast or in other parts of the country who weren't Southern, Carter was a little bit of a scary figure, because he was very, Southern Baptist, very evangelical in the words he used to get elected. Essentially, I think were very, the dog whistles for his era, right? And of course, he ended up carrying the South, which was at that time was still very democratic. So this was as the parties swapped in the South. They were already getting squirrely about because of civil rights and LBJ. They'd already started leaking away, the blue dog Democrats, they used to call them. but Carter was the last one to get a huge, basically, I shouldn't say that because Clinton did win a number of southern states as well, but Carter was the last one to get the big block of southern states. And then when he came in, you go, boy, we've got this real evangelical person in there, but he didn't play the game because he was very, as we came to later see, very social justice oriented, very much in the sort of the walk of what we would consider, the gospel, in a lot of respects. And so when you mentioned the year of the evangelical, yeah, that was it. That was when in the mid 70s, late 70s, when people were really consolidating, starting to use their power to, because they wanted to have the moral majority, with Jerry Falwell was explicitly political, and they realized that southern whites who were angry about civil rights were ripe for the picking, and that's what they did.
Right.
And they
Absolutely.
used abortion
One
as
of
their
the
primary thing to do that with, which was never an issue for
right
most.
after
Yeah. And that's how they got
right.
Catholics on
Your
board too.
mainline
Yeah.
mainline Protestants and Catholics. It really that was a medical private. That was just it was not what it is today.
Yeah.
And one of the things you talked about Jimmy Carter, I need to find. I it might have been Jerry Falwell, but maybe it was Pat Robert. But
Yeah. Well, Pat
left a
Robertson was
meeting
in. Yes.
but left a meeting with Jimmy Carter and basically said, "He's not one of us. He is not part of
Yep.
this moral majority. He's not moral,"
Uh-huh.
or something, and I was like, "Right, Jimmy Carter's not moral. That's
Yes.
and he's out here building houses. Like, that
Right.
guy?"
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing where it really came home to me is I think I was 16, 17, something like that. Because I used to um, uh, volunteer a lot. Was in youth group and everything. I was in this large Presbyterian church in Orange County that it's called Trinity United Presbyterian Church, and was kind of famous at the time. There was Hollywood Presbyterian, which was also well known at the time. Margaret Mears is a name that some people know, and that. And they and Hollywood Press has a camp, or had a camp, up in the mountains called Forest Home. And a lot of, so people like Josh McDowell went there, Billy Graham went there, all these people went, would go and visit there. So I volunteered there a bunch, like babysitting and working and stuff like that. And one of these times I was up there, I was uh, met with a small group, and there was this, adult leader. He probably was 20 or something like that, a little bit older than me. And I said something about Jimmy Carter, or I said something about, I don't know how the subject came up. And that guy just went off on how Carter's a Marxist and how he's horrible. He is not for Jesus and all that. I go, what are you talking about? Um, I was shocked. I was stunned. And I later realized, oh, he was because this guy had bought in to what was happening at that moment in 1978. Yeah. So I look back at that now, I can, visualize it and see the anger, but the hatred on this guy's face. And I go, wait a minute, I'm at a, you know, I'm in an
Mhm.
evangelical camp, run by Presbyterians. How could you be so hateful toward this guy who's, very openly Christian? Well, that's why. Because at that time, Carter wasn't going to play the game. And then they started throwing all their support behind Ronald Reagan. And Reagan at the time,
Absolutely.
in Southern California, you couldn't tell a Reagan joke. You
No.
know? They loved Reagan so much.
And that's it's a really interesting because, Reagan not only was divorced, but passed under his governorship, while he was governor, passed one of the most progressive abortion laws in the country at the time.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so to swing and have him be the president that's most associated with the religious right really is calls to mind for me how much money
Yes.
can change your morals. Like,
Exactly, yes.
um, a little bit of, fame, legacy,
Uh-huh.
and then, for hi it was really the script was there. Just read it. Here it is.
Well,
Go
yeah,
do it,
Reagan's an
pastor.
avatar was an avatar for this group. I mean, Reagan was governor from, let's see, 60, I think it was 66 to 74. So he was out of office when all of this was going on. But yeah, they latched on. Well, Reagan got a lot of interest in 76 primaries because Reagan was going against Gerald Ford at the time, and and challenged Gerald Ford and made Gerald Ford weaker. So that was a close election. 1976 was quite close, and Carter was a complete dark horse. Nobody knew who Carter was until very late in at that time. And so he was a dark horse and came through and beat him. But Reagan was probably the cause for Carter to become president because Reagan had weakened uh, Ford. But yeah, he was so all that stuff you're talking about. Now Reagan was always, very anti-communist. He was very, he was a darling of the sort of the the John Birch Society people. Was very strong in Southern California. But he was always their darling, the darling of that movement. But then I think that Reagan didn't give a hoot about. Reagan actually didn't give a hoot about religion. He was one of the least religious presidents we've ever had. But then he became this avatar. He became this vehicle. It's probably a better word for it, for the religious right. They go, oh, he's our guy. And that's exactly what happened.
Yes, it is. And
It's very
it's
much like we've
so
seen with Trump. It was absolutely,
yes.
very unreligious person
Mhm.
becoming the darling of the religious movement.
Right. And it is. And that's what's concerning is there's Reagan walked so that Trump could run, and now I'm looking at JD
Yeah.
Vance and I'm like, "Oh no,
Yeah.
we've got a sprinter. Like whatever
Right.
we think we've seen so far." uh,
Yeah. The battle will continue.
yes. Tell me what is it like within the Presbyterian Church? How are you responding to the Christian nationalism? How are you seeing it? We can even
Hmm.
start small because I know it's a big question. How are
Yeah.
you seeing it in your neck of the woods of Washington State?
Um, well, what most people don't realize is that the Presbyterian Church is historically quite conservative. When you think back to the early to mid 20th century, Presbyterians were basically your city leaders, your bankers, your lawyers, that they were along with Episcopalians, they were the ones running for public office. 11 U.S. presidents have been Presbyterian or Presbyterian adjacent. And so because of that, and also Presbyterians were one of the groups that really benefited in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s with my with all these people going to church, but Cold War scare did a lot for the mainline churches, right? And that's what something like was it 80% of people identified as Christians or more, 80 something percent, and were saying they were going to church and all that. Now, so the result of that is that there are still people throughout my life, but still there are people who remember that era and pine for it. And you hear it all the time. I remember when our church was filled with kids, and young families and all of that. So there is that leaning, and I would, that's true for all mainline denominations. There's that, bunch of old people wishing they could recapture the past. That's fading quite a bit because they're now in their 90s, a lot of them. And that's happened in my own congregation. I started there, and I immediately did 8 funerals in the first year and a half. Um, so the result of that is that y- we have been, but there was a movement in with civil rights into the 70s, into the 80s, in the mainline denominations towards social justice, because they realized that uh, the they couldn't be what they were. That civil rights did matter. That there was this rising tide of conservatism around the country, and they didn't want to go there. You know, so there's always been this tension between these groups. Um, a lot of it was around, women in leadership. That was a big struggle in the mid 20th century. And of course, it's still a big struggle in a lot of denominations, right? But then that morphed over time into uh, even as early as the 80s, for LGBTQ people wanting their rights and agitating for it in the churches. And some churches moved relatively quickly toward that, but Presbyterian Church didn't. We were resistors. Just like the Presbyterian Church in the mid 20th century were definitely civil rights resistors. We did not get on board until later, and that was part of that sort of, I would call, conservative nature. So what that has resulted in my denomination is that there's this thing called the PRRI, which is the Public Religion. I forget what the organization's name is. They do surveys quite a bit, and they did one about the 2024 election. And of the PCUSA, which most people think of as a liberal denomination, which I always laugh about, 52% voted for Trump. And
Really?
yes, and the
It's
United
split.
Methodists, yeah, basically just like the country. Um, the United Methodists were very similar, and people think of United Methodist churches having rainbow flags and stuff like that. The Evangelical Presbyterian Church, which was an earlier split off, was 83 or 85, 84%, something like that. The PCA, the Presbyterian Church in America, which split off over civil rights, but also women in the pulpit in the early 70s. Yeah, they were even stronger. So they're way up there with the Southern Baptists, like nearly 90%. Whereas the Episcopal Church of America, which was more like 20%, right? Because Episcopal Church has generally been more sort of the East Coast liberal type church, right? I don't know about your denomination, but what is it again? It was the
Yeah,
disciple,
so
but you're not disciples of
Disciples of
Christ. Yeah,
Christ,
yeah, it's more liberal
and
yeah,
Episcopalian. So I'm
yeah,
split. It's funny. I was raised in
yeah,
both traditions, but yeah, Disciples of Christ also has a lot of division, as does the
huh?
Anglican and Episcopalian Church. The I am interested. Did you? I know that you said you're from California. Did you, while you're watching all of this unfold, did you see, and then even in Washington, are you seeing folks in your community? Um, how are their thoughts? This is okay. In a post-Vietnam era world,
Yeah,
right there, how did you see people's views towards military, towards
yeah,
America
interesting.
in that time?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think in my denomination, because it's was always more traditionalist and more resistant of uh social change. Probably military was always more positive, had more, and of course, right after, well, I had 2 brothers who were drafted in late 60s, early 70s. So I think back to the fear. There was tremendous fear in the country about getting drafted because, by that time with Life magazine, Time magazine, uh, the press had no or was showing a lot of blood. And I really think that that was a lot of the reasons why the Vietnam War got so much opposition was because the press really showed what it was like. They didn't sanitize it. Isn't it interesting that since then, since the 80s, 90s, there's been a lot more sanitizing of the press. We don't see bloody soldiers from Iraq or we didn't from Iraq and Afghanistan. And uh, so the tide, I think, changed. So I think the whole country was anti-military during the 1970s, really, and then gradually with the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, that was a real watershed because then suddenly, I think a lot of that anti-military sentiment was going away because now we had heroes. We had you know, uh, a new crop of heroes. Remember, what was his name? Schwarzkopf. Norman Schwarzkopf was an absolute hero at that time. We had Colin Powell, total hero. So there was a lot of, I think that, for religious people, obviously they follow the same trends. I think that the rehabilitation of the military in the early 90s was real and really did, and I've known a few Vietnam vets over the years, like in church settings and stuff. I just grieve for the pain that they went through because they saw the complete collapse of the public image of military people. And 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 then of course even in media, like with Apocalypse Now, the movie, Platoon, Born on the Fourth of what is it? Born on the Fourth of July. That movie with Tom Cruise. All of those showed this realism of how awful it was for them in Vietnam, and started develop, and of course the moral ambiguity of the Vietnam War,
Yes.
which was extremely ambiguous. Uh, it's I think that yeah. So I don't know. So that's just obviously the image of military has rehabilitated a lot in the last three,
Mhm.
4 decades. I think that, of course, more of the ideal. Well, um, I didn't want to say idolatry. You could say idolatry of the military kind of happened more on the right, on the right of the spectrum. But I think the whole country has gone that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
So
an
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
What's these swings? Like they're so for my research on Christian nationalism, I'm reading Pete Hegseth's books
Yes.
and I, I feel like that I should get an award for that.
You
They're like, "Thank you,
should.
Lee, for doing it," so that everyone else
That's
didn't.
hard. Yeah.
Think,
Yeah. He's a particularly
but he
bad.
go.
Yeah.
Well, and that's something that he goes off about how since the 60s, the whole liberal Marxist agenda,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
has been and, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, "You're acting like we came out it came out of A, that's what we think, or B,
Yeah.
like, it came out of nowhere and isn't a response to policies that have been implemented." Um, like and even we'll see it right now. I mean, this past week, we, with everything with the Somali daycare, and
Oh, yeah.
now
Hmm.
that as an entry point or a way for the government to justify cutting child federally funded daycare. Like they're doing
Yeah.
like they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, what happened in Minnesota?" So like nobody's getting childcare
Yeah. Yeah.
and and that's part of Project 2025, and I was thinking how that was very deliberate to like force women to go back home.
Oh, yeah.
like,
Well, and that's what they
and
want. Yeah. Hmm. I mean, that you mentioned Pete Hegseth. I think he's a particularly malevolent character because he's basically Douglas Wilson, and that whole uh, wanting. Now that trend's always been there. I mean, the moral majority definitely wanted women out of the workforce. They wanted them back at home. You know, that's always been there. But this there were that group of those conservatives kept the Nazis away, right? You know, kept the John Birchers away, kept them out of the political mainstream, but have always flirted with them, right? So you saw this during Reagan administration. You saw it even George Bush, who was very much of a you know a blue blazer, you know, leather shoe type Republican, even kind of a Rockefeller Republican in a way. He played footsie with these people in order to get elected, and of course, uh, Bush Jr. very much did, right? And so they all did it. They all saw the power and they went for it. And so Hegseth is just the much worse version of that because Hegseth, I mean, he's not a stupid man, but he acts like a stupid man, you know. Uh,
this is, and that's what's scary because he and I get them flipped, but he went to Princeton and Harvard, and I don't know
yes.
which for which. So he knows the language. He knows exactly the institutions he's talking about. Like, and it reads to me, I don't know. I go back and how I read it because I'm just trying to figure out what he thinks and like get the quotes from him.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But it reads as if someone, yeah, that's he got he's accused the army of like discharging him or getting him in trouble for being too conservative in the military and not having free speech. Like this is like it's like everybody has told Pete Hegseth, "Hey dude, like your views aren't cool here." The
Right.
military and Princeton and Harvard,
Right.
so on both sides.
And
And
you're
then
an
you
alcoholic, and you know.
right.
Yeah.
And it's
and
I just
and you drink on the job, and
anyway.
yeah. But yeah,
Yeah, the whole thing.
and he's fully
Not a
into
calm,
the
cool,
Douglas
collected man.
Wilson. Yes, not at all.
Mhm.
But he's fully into the Douglas Wilson thing, and the fact that Douglas Wilson, who's very, very much, Christian nationalist by, to the hilt. In fact, Douglas Wilson, well, I saw something recently. He has his own little publishing arm in Moscow, Idaho, right? He has his own little
Oh,
publishing company, his own college, the whole thing. Uh, and,
yep.
uh, and he's written a lot, and he doesn't write about Jesus. He doesn't write about scripture or Jesus. He writes about basically white nationalism and returning women to subservient roles in the home, and uh, you know, um, and he's a dominionist, right? He wants to make the country into a white nationalist country, and he's I think he's loony, but he's
Well,
not dumb
and I had
either,
the opportunity. No, they're not dumb.
No.
That's the thing is like so many people when I've talked about Peter Hegseth on my social media, they've been like, he can read. I didn't know he can even write. And I was like, guys, this is what's getting us in trouble. You have to
Right?
like
Yeah.
they're very
Do not
smart.
discount them.
Like,
Yes.
I
Oh yeah. I mean, and like I mentioned Schaefer. Schaefer was brilliant. Um, Paul Weyrich, who was behind Jerry Falwell in the '70s, was brilliant. Roger Ailes, who started Fox News, uh, was and he was at NBC before that, and he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew that Nixon got almost impeached and resigned because of the media. So and he vowed to never let that happen again, and that's what Fox News became. All of these people that we're talking about, and you meant Heritage Foundation, Project 2025. All of these people they have a single-minded focus to return the country to a vision of what they want, and And that was true in the 80s too. I mean, very much. That was what was behind Reagan. Now, their Achilles heel, which comes up, is that when they flirt with the really hardcore people, then people start running away. And I kind of wonder if that's what's happening now, because Hegseth, with his tattoos, his white nationalist tattoos, people will excuse those, like the Jerusalem cross and the was the Deus Vult and stuff like that. No, that's neo-Nazi stuff. And it really is, especially when you get it tattooed on your body as a Protestant. If you were a Catholic, you could say, well, oh, yeah, well, Catholics use, yeah, but he's not a Catholic. He hates Catholics. You know, Douglas Wilson hates Catholics. So they're using them for their project, right? It's very similar to Christian Zionists and how they use Jewish people and they use the country of Israel. They don't give a hoot about Israel. They don't give a hoot about. They don't like Jewish people, or but they see them as the way to get what they want. So sorry for the
Absolutely.
rant, but that
No, that was not a rant at all. That was well, because because the projection of all of that, right? If you
hmm
like, is to blame Islam for
yeah,
all of those same things,
yep,
right? Like, don't we have to root out Islam? It's going to, and then it's like,
hmm
I went over the summer to Pakistan for Disciples of
oh, uh-huh,
Christ, and and it helped inform my research
huh,
for Christian nationalism because I got to be in
right,
um, Pakistan is a democratic country. They obviously are heavily Muslim, but like they're having the same conversations we are where they're like, the Taliban is not Quran. Like, what is
yeah,
that? And
uh-huh,
like Pakistan's government is
yeah,
bombing the Taliban. And like, so
hmm
this idea of there's a monolithic Muslim who, and all of them are out to get you is just not true. And it's also more concerning because of exactly the people who are spreading that message. Like
yeah,
everything that the conservative religious right is looking to do. There's just
yeah.
so much overlap.
Well, and I mean, it's a lot like Iran, and the revolution in Iran is the vast majority of Iranian Persian people don't want to be that way, but they, you know, they, it's the minority who have control of everything. And I think that that's what this group of people we're talking about, the Christian nationalists, want. They can't they can't convince the one of the beauties of America is that we're super diverse and there's 330 million of us or more, and there's a half a billion guns, and there's and we have independence of the military, which is a great blessing. Uh, so they can't. This is what the knitting cult lady talks about all the time. And they can't do it by force. They can only do it by coercion and misinformation.
Right. Absolutely. And that was, you brought up Moscow, Idaho a little while ago. That Moscow, Idaho, I think, is also related to where they're going to put that training facility. The Qatar, I don't know if you heard about that, but
No,
there
I
was like a
didn't. Uh-uh.
Saudi oh, people were real upset about it.
Oh
Like,
yes.
uh, this administration getting the plane from Saudi Arabia, or maybe it was
Huh?
Qatar, I don't remember, but apparently America will now have a training facility
I
and I
yes.
think it's Moscow, Idaho. So that doesn't
Well, yeah,
surprise.
that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Well,
It's
that
right, like it's like,
that
go
reminds
ahead.
me because you were talking a little bit earlier about what is it like to be like on the West Coast or whatever. Um, you know, uh, and I'm sure it's the same in your part of the country and everywhere. Is just you always have a mix of people. Some of the most right wing uh, people you can imagine are 10 miles from here. You know, very or in Western Washington. So you see it a lot. You go to a place called Lewis County. That's where Centralia, Chehalis is. That is probably the deepest red county in the state of Washington, at least one of them. And you go, wait a minute, but that's in the middle of the, no, it's just, that's the way. Mark Driscoll, and Mars Hill Church had a huge following here in Seattle. And, and you go, well, Seattle's so liberal. No, it isn't. It's a mix of people. My sister lives in Alabama, and she's been there for many years, and it's the same thing there, but kind of
Yes.
in a flipped, is that there are a lot of pretty progressive people in Alabama. They don't have political
Yes.
power, but we saw Doug Wilson, or not Doug Wilson, Doug Jones become senator for a brief period there. That's because there are people in Alabama who don't like what their state government does, and they don't like what's going on. So it always, just that always reminds me, is that everywhere you go in the country, you're gonna we are really together, a lot more than we
Yes.
think.
Yes, and, like, we're so yeah, we're so much more alike, and it's particularly when we look at local issues, um, and there's no clean way. I know that Marjorie Taylor Greene, before she woke up, I don't know what else to call it, but, she was calling for a national divorce, and I spoke out against that multiple I was like, "I don't think you understand how bloody these things get. These
Yeah,
are
yeah.
not like, civil wars are not normal. It
No.
is really passionate, like, on par with domestic violence. Like, it's
Hmm.
that we're not just gonna move smooth and then how are you gonna divvy that up, Marjorie? Like, like, you get the county clinic, and then someone gets the pediatric like, how are we gonna do that? And, so it's just, yeah, it's a really sad thing, and like you said there, it's Mark Driscoll had influences, like, right in urban
Right.
areas that
Yeah,
people think are
absolutely.
blue,
Hmm. Well, I mean,
right?
even Marjorie
Uh,
Taylor Greene, who's, I think she's in one of the most conservative districts in Georgia, but she's just right over the border from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And which and even in her little neck of the woods there, and she's not far from Atlanta, and Atlanta's very blue, right? Uh, well, at least parts of Atlanta are. And and like my sister, she lives in Huntsville area in northern Alabama, and you go, that's why I think this talk about national divorce and stuff like that is ridiculous because, well, first of all, the people with money are in the cities, and the cities, you know, aren't the ones who want to break the country apart, right? So, it's like here in Oregon, well, in Oregon, Washington, the people who want to separate from the western counties, like there's this movement that half of Oregon wants to become part of Idaho. Well, first of all, nobody in Idaho wants West or Eastern Oregon because it's poor. It's really poor. It has poor infrastructure. They don't produce anything. They have a little bit of ranching and stuff like that, but it's not like what Eastern Washington, which is filled with agriculture and Spokane's a big city and all of that. Uh, or Southern Oregon, Northern California. Have you ever heard of the state of Jefferson? This is the there are a bunch of
that
people,
rumbles.
right? All they do is produce, pot. They're
Yeah,
just there's just
right.
no they're just so dependent, and I think you see that all over the country. Is that the places that are really separatist and really angry and have kind of fallen for this are really dependent on the federal government, or they're not wealthy, they can't support themselves. So that's why I think it's so much different than, say, the US Civil War. That was elites against elites, right? The elite Southerners, your average Southerner didn't have slaves, right? And they didn't care. It was the elite Southerners that wanted to
Right.
go to war with to preserve their power. So I think that's really, yeah, this populist thing, what we're going through, it's not popular, number one, with everybody, enough people, if people get people to pay attention. And two, they don't have the money. It Yeah, when you have tech bros behind them, yeah, they do, right? But
Well, and what's interesting is there's uh, we're seeing really intense ideologies play out. And one of the things I read in Pete Hegseth's book is he went after any claim that Jesus is a socialist. And I mean, for
yes.
like 5 pages, like I'm just like, um, and goes on to say that Jesus would have liked capitalism. And I was like, no, like, I don't. I know one thing he didn't like. I don't know how he would have felt
Right.
about socialism, but I know
He wasn't for the
it
Romans.
was right. But it was just, and it's and that's what is so interesting is how, particularly in American history, Jesus has been used on both sides of the
Yeah, yeah,
battlefield.
very, very good point. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can use the Bible to support capitalism in that there's obviously a lot of commerce and trading going on in the Bible, but you can also use it in shared resources and socialism too, because I mean, the Jubilee, what is the Jubilee? Redistribution. So I just go, you can't, or you can use the Bible for whatever you want. But to say Jesus was a socialist is not, he was definitely for justice, but, or was Jesus for, I don't know. I don't know. Is Jesus for imperial control? No. I mean, come on. It's just a silly thing. Yeah.
Right.
I always
Yeah.
find that
And
pretty funny to enlist Jesus on your team to for your political beliefs.
and there's just what's really concerning is as we move into what this Christian nationalist does want, because it is inserting Jesus into your political beliefs, and they do. They like our beliefs inform our political votes, absolutely. But this blatant use of a secular position in our government to
Yeah.
make Christian claims is very
Yeah.
concerning.
It is.
And
Yeah.
I think other Christians should be concerned about this too, because for me, it's a that's not what our government's for, but B, if if we allow that, what's going to happen when it's a Jewish, a Muslim, a Catholic, like whenever? Like we stop this so that nobody has that. Um, it's a matter of fairness. Um, so yes, this war against ecumenism.
Yeah. Well, did Hegseth is he part of the people that say that Jesus wasn't a refugee? That's been a thing in recent months. I forget
Oh, I haven't gotten there yet.
the people who
But
who did the He Gets Us campaign, the spent all the money on like the Super Bowl and He Gets Us,
that's
Jesus
right.
Gets Us. Remember that? Well, that was funded
Mhm.
by Hobby Lobby family, the Green family, and I know that a bunch of Christian nationalists got really upset last year or in yeah, well, last year now in 2025 when they started saying Jesus was a refugee. We need to, have compassion. And they got really upset because they thought, well, wait a minute, I thought you were on our team. I don't know if Hegseth was part of that or not, but that's more of a Christy Nome thing. But
No, I'll look into he's definitely of the Dominionist
uh-huh.
faith. He's a reformed Calvinist.
Hmm.
Um and yeah,
The cred,
his
right?
and
The Christian, what is
mhm.
it? Christian Reformed. Yeah.
And I mean, that is his whole thing is, trust God, and have babies. Like, it
Yeah, right.
is I mean, really, at one point, he says, like, he lists 3, and one of them is trust God, I can't remember the second, and then, like, the third was forge family members
Hmm.
at Mini, and I was like,
Yeah.
even if I wanted to, where's the money? Where's the economy? I love the vision of
Right.
like, thanks, but like, how are we gonna afford all these mouths? So
Well,
it's
it's a false
definitely
originalism, right? I mean, it's like
right,
pretending that there once was a period that was orthodox and better than it is today. And you know, I just and that's sort of a fascist thing, right? As you look back and you say, we just have to return to when values were good and when people were better than they are today. And you know,
right,
that's what
right.
they weren't.
No,
People
they
were not
weren't.
better in the 1950s,
And no,
and you
no.
definitely don't
I
want to be
mean, they
a
weren't.
woman, right? In that period.
No, and it's so easy to. I mean, and this idea that America, secularism, that puts us on the path to hell by having a secular state.
Hmm.
And uh, I've been in a lot of colonial history lately as I've been reading
Uh huh.
what was going on during those conversations about the Establishment Clause and
Uh huh.
the Constitution. And um, that was super controversial at the time. I mean, people were in the newspaper calling Thomas Jefferson an infidel. They were like, "You've put us on the
Yes.
path to hell. You're an anti-religious,
Uh huh.
like secular. You're gonna drill us into the hell with your science." And
Right.
and it
Yeah.
didn't help. It didn't help that Jefferson definitely, like, but he didn't like the clergy class. He was scared of the corruption
Yeah.
of the clergy
Right.
class at the time, and so they just went after him. He was like, "I do think
Yeah.
clergy can be corrupt," and they were like, "See, you hate religion," and he was like, and
Right.
just every
It sounds familiar.
corner, it looks like I'm like, yeah, I know these arguments, and it's funny how these, "Oh, we're doomed. We're all going Barack Hussein Obama, we're going to hell. We're gonna have Sharia law," and you're like,
Right.
"Golly,
Well, yeah,
no."
and most people don't
Like,
realize that, yeah, in the colonial period around the Revolutionary War, a lot of people didn't go to church. They didn't like church. They didn't like religion
right.
because they associated it with Britain. You know, they associated with Europe and loyalists and stuff like that. So it's kind of, you know, it wasn't really until the early 19th century when you had the Second Great Awakening, people were, you know, really becoming religious again. So uh, Jefferson wasn't that unusual. You know, George Washington was not a religious guy. You know, Jefferson wasn't. Franklin wasn't. The most religious of all those guys was James Madison, and James Madison, you know, he was scared of the religious people too, because he thought, well, you know, if you have religious people running your government, that's a form that's where you know, where oppression comes from. That's where you know, controlling that's the what supports monarchy in Europe, right?
Yes.
So why would
Right,
you want to return to that, right?
no, and also for folks in the church, why would you want to get the government involved in your church? You know what I mean? Like, that's a slippery slope too,
Right.
is using the church. And um it's a really fascinating because, it is hard for a lot of us to separate ourselves. Like, I mean, for our politics come from a lot of our theologies, which are
Yeah.
from the church. But there's also, you know, being able to stand in a very multifaceted community and
Uh-huh.
see like, oh well, I can't be the only point of view on this, or there's just it's really interesting how some people are able to not separate, I guess, so to
Yeah.
speak, and have very like black and white ways of seeing the world that I kind of am envious of just because it seems like they sleep better than I do when things are black and they're like, yeah, it's just easy. It's either good or it's
It's a
bad. And I'm
curse,
sitting
yes.
here like, right, I'm in the nuance of it. And I'm like, well, hold on, I need to, and um, So, Pastor Rob, today has been absolutely fantastic. It is Friday afternoon and I'm hanging out with you. Thank you. I want to give you,
Oh,
go have your Friday evening.
well, thank you
But
so much. Yeah. I it just
how
yeah, yeah.
can we got to do this again. We will do
Sure.
this again.
We will do this
But
again.
in the meantime, how can I send my folks over to your way? How can they
Uh-huh.
follow more of Pastor Rob?
Real Bible Rob, that's me, and I also have a podcast, and we'll link across, and I'm on all the services and stuff like that. I am also pretty active on TikTok. And I think that's where I saw you or we've met is on TikTok. And I'm Real Bible Rob on TikTok. On Instagram, Facebook, I'm Edmonds Presbyterian Church. And on YouTube, I'm Rob Christ 8999. And but also with the Real Bible Rob label. And the and of course they're a little different, right? When you're doing 60 to 90-second type videos, you're just trying to get in. But for longer discussions, yeah, both YouTube and my podcast as well. So
Well, it has been a joy meeting you and getting to know
yeah,
you and watching your content. Thank you for speaking out, for using your platform as a Presbyterian pastor to speak out against Christian nationalism. It's going to take all of us.
yeah, I
So
think it
thank you.
is. Yeah, and likewise, I love your content so much, and I'm so grateful that you invited me to come on, and I just love speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you. Folks, that is another episode of Follow the Leader. This is Pastor Rob out of Edmonds Presbyterian Church in Washington State. Again, Pastor Rob, Real Bible Rob. That is how you can find him on the platforms. Folks, take care of yourselves out there. And man, be in community. We're going to need it.
Yes.
I'll see you next time.
All right, take care.
Bye.